Why Ireland is both empty and full. This is an island of just over 5 million people. But it's an island that feels like it should have many, many more. Its fields are impossibly green, its history is impossibly deep, but its population feels impossibly small for a nation of its size and influence. For every single person living within the borders of the Republic of Ireland today, there are somewhere between 10 and 12 people scattered across the globe who claim Irish ancestry. It is a nation uniquely defined by who is there, but perhaps even more powerfully by who isn't. This is a story of a profound and defining paradox. A story of a country that became one of the emptiest places in Western Europe, a global byword for depopulation, exodus, and loss. And it's the story of how, against all odds, it began the monumental task of filling up again, triggering a powerful and punishingly costly resurgence that has created an entirely new set of 21st century problems. How did a nation so thoroughly hollowed out by catastrophe become one of Europe's fastest-growing countries? And what is the staggering price of that recovery? This is the story of why Ireland is and has always been both empty and full. To understand the Ireland of today, you have to understand its ghosts. And there are millions of them. In the early 1840s, on the eve of disaster, the island was home to roughly 8.2 million people. This made it one of the most densely populated agricultural regions in all of Europe. It was a landscape teeming with life, a frantic, vibrant world of small-scale farming, large families, and a culture deeply intertwined with the soil. But this entire existence was balanced on a knife's edge. The vast majority of the rural poor, the masses of the Irish population, depended almost entirely on a single humble crop, the potato. It wasn't just a food source, it was the sole pillar supporting a fragile society. When the insidious fungal blight, Phytophthora infestans, arrived on Irish shores in 1845, it was not merely a crop failure. It was the trigger for a complete and total societal collapse. The Great Famine, or as it is known in the Irish language, and Gorda Mór, the Great Hunger, was a cataclysm of truly unimaginable horror. Over the next 5 nightmarish years, at least 1 million people starved to death or died from diseases like typhus and cholera that preyed mercilessly on their weakened, emaciated bodies. Another 1 million were forced to flee, many crammed onto the infamous coffin ships, rickety, disease-ridden vessels bound for North America, desperate to escape a land that had seemingly turned on them with a vengeance. But to label the famine a simple natural disaster is to miss the darkest part of the truth. It was a catastrophic failure of governance, exacerbated by a cruel and exploitative system of land ownership. Most of the fertile land was owned by absentee British landlords, many of whom had never set foot on the island. Their land was worked by Irish tenant farmers, scraping by on tiny, subdivided, and ultimately unsustainable plots. And while the potato crop failed and the people starved in their fields, vast quantities of other foodstuffs, wheat, oats, barley, and livestock, were still being shipped out of Irish ports to be sold in Britain and elsewhere. These exports, which could have fed the starving population many times over, were used to pay rent to the landlords, sometimes loaded onto ships under the watchful protection of armed guards. It is a fact that remains a deep, bitter, and unhealed wound in the nation's collective memory. What makes Ireland's story so uniquely haunting, however, is what happened next. For most countries throughout history, a famine is a temporary demographic shock, a horrific event that is eventually followed by recovery and population growth. In Ireland, the population decline didn't stop. It just kept going and going. For over a century, the famine had not only killed and scattered the people, it had fundamentally broken the old way of life. It had shattered any lingering belief in a viable future on the island. A culture of emigration became deeply, painfully ingrained in the national psyche. The American Wake, a heartbreaking gathering for those leaving for the New World, became a common and somber ritual in villages across the country. It was treated not as a farewell party, but as a funeral for the living. Families would gather, mourning the departure of their sons and daughters, knowing with grim certainty that they would probably never see them again. Generation after generation, the youngest, the brightest, and the most ambitious left for the promise of a better life in the United States, Britain, Canada, and Australia. They sent money home, sustaining those they left behind, but in doing so, they bled the country of its youth, leaving behind an aging population and a slowly shrinking nation. By 1911, the island's population had plummeted to around 4.4 million, roughly half of what it had been just 70 years earlier. By the time the Republic of Ireland was formally established as an independent state, it was a nation born into a state of perpetual demographic decline. The new nation was, in many ways, a hollowed-out shell of its former self, a country of old people and memories. You can still see the physical scars of this great emptying today. Travel across the west of Ireland, and you will find the haunting ruins of abandoned stone cottages, their roofs long since collapsed, their walls slowly being reclaimed by the impossibly green fields. You can walk the so-called famine roads, paths built by the starving and destitute in exchange for meager rations of food, projects of public works that often led from nowhere to nowhere. These aren't just ruins on a landscape, they are stark and powerful monuments to a vanished population. They are the physical proof of the Great Emptying. The population of what is now the Republic of Ireland would continue this downward spiral, finally bottoming out in the 1960s at under 3 million people. The country was quiet, it was cheap, and it was profoundly empty. For the next 100 years, it looked as though Ireland's story would be one of quiet, steady decline, a beautiful, melancholic, and increasingly irrelevant backwater on the western edge of Europe. But in the second half of the 20th century, something truly remarkable, something almost unthinkable began to happen. The tide, which had been flowing out for so long, began, ever so slowly, to turn. The change wasn't a single event, but a series of deliberate, almost radical policy shifts born out of desperation. Starting in the late 1950s, Ireland's leaders began to systematically ditch the old, failed protectionist economic policies that had left the nation isolated and impoverished. They decided to open the country up to the world. A pivotal decision was to invest heavily and publicly in free secondary education, creating a skilled, well-educated, English-speaking workforce where one had not existed before. This was paired with another crucial and far more controversial move, establishing a very low corporate tax rate, a direct and aggressive strategy designed to lure in foreign multinational companies. It was an immense gamble, a complete reinvention of a national identity. But it paid off. In 1973, Ireland joined what would eventually become the European Union, a move that unlocked unfettered access to a massive single market. American and European corporations, especially in the then burgeoning sectors of pharmaceuticals, technology, and advanced manufacturing, started to take notice. Big names like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and later the new wave of tech giants like Intel, Microsoft, and Apple set up huge operations in the country, drawn by the tax incentives and the educated workforce. For decades, this was a slow burn, a gradual buildup of foreign capital and expertise. But by the mid-1990s, the fuse that had been laid over 40 years was finally lit for an economic explosion. The Celtic Tiger was born. The growth was staggering, unlike anything Ireland had ever seen in its entire history. The economy roared, expanding at a rate that was the envy of the developed world. Dublin, once a quiet, slightly shabby and architecturally beautiful but neglected capital, was utterly transformed into a bustling, chaotic hub of construction cranes, gleaming glass-fronted offices, and the palpable buzz of new money. And for the first time in its modern history, the planes and ferries began carrying people into Ireland, not just away from it. The demographic trend that had defined the country for 150 years was thrown into a sudden and dramatic reverse. Young Irish people who had been forced to emigrate during the bleak, recession-hit 1980s started coming home. A phenomenon known as the return of the diaspora, something that would have been utterly unthinkable to their parents' generation. They were joined by hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world. As the European Union expanded eastward, workers from new member states, especially Poland and the Baltic states, arrived in vast numbers to fill jobs in construction, services, and hospitality. At the same time, highly skilled professionals from India, Brazil, the United States, and beyond came to work for the multinational corporations that now drove the engine of the Irish economy. Between 2002 and 2022, more than 1.6 million people immigrated to Ireland, a staggering influx for a small nation. The 2008 global financial crisis hit the country with brutal force, bursting the property bubble and briefly halting the boom, even causing a short-term, painful return to emigration. But the underlying economic model, built on the resilient and profitable multinational sector, proved remarkably durable. In 2022, a hugely symbolic milestone was finally reached. The population of the Republic of Ireland officially passed 5 million people for the first time in 171 years. And the growth hasn't stopped. By April 2024, the population was estimated at 5.38 million. In the 12 months prior to that, Ireland saw its largest single-year population increase in 16 years, an increase driven by record-high levels of immigration. Projections now show the country could reach nearly 6 million people by 2030. A nation once defined by absence was now a magnet for the world. The return was real. The emptiness was filling. But here is the central, painful twist in this story of recovery. This incredible resurgence has come at a tremendous cost. The very same forces that filled the country with people, jobs, and a newfound sense of optimism have also created a new kind of crisis. Ireland is growing, but it is visibly, painfully struggling to cope. The nation once defined by its emptiness is now, in many crucial ways, frustratingly, dysfunctionally full. The most obvious and acute symptom of this is the housing crisis. Put simply, Ireland has not been able to build homes nearly fast enough to keep pace with its booming population and the influx of new arrivals. The result is a chronic, systemic shortage that has sent property prices and rental costs soaring to astronomical levels, especially in and around Dublin, where roughly 30% of the country's entire population now lives. Finding a place to live in the capital has become a modern-day blood sport. Renting a modest one-bedroom apartment can easily set you back over €2,000 a month. Trying to buy a home is just as daunting, with the average income required for a first-time buyer climbing to over €84,400 in 2024, a figure that locks a huge portion of the population, especially young people and essential workers, completely out of the market. This dysfunction has given Ireland the grim distinction of having the highest housing costs in the entire European Union, nearly double the EU average, according to Eurostat. And it is not just housing. The same Eurostat figures consistently rank Ireland as one of the most expensive countries in the EU for a wide range of goods and services, second only to Denmark. Prices for everyday essentials are more than 40% higher than the EU average. The cost of alcohol, food, transport, and energy puts a constant strain on household budgets. Even with high wages available in some sectors of the economy, many people find that their salaries are simply eaten up by the sheer, unavoidable cost of living. The national infrastructure is also showing deep and worrying signs of strain. Dublin's public transport system is notoriously overcrowded. The healthcare system is under constant pressure, plagued by long waiting lists for appointments and procedures. In growing suburban towns, schools are struggling to find classroom space for an ever-increasing number of children. These are all the classic signs of a country growing far faster than its public services can possibly handle. Ironically, the very engine of Ireland's success is also a major part of the problem. Foreign multinational corporations, the source of so much wealth, have created hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs. In 2022, they made up just 3% of all companies in Ireland but generated a staggering 71% of the country's total economic turnover. This has created a stark two-tier economy, a high-wage, globalized sector for a lucky few, and a much larger domestic economy with far lower wages and less security. The continual influx of highly paid professionals for the multinational sector has only served to push the housing market further and further out of reach for everyone else. Ireland's economic model was brilliant at creating wealth, but it has proven to be deeply flawed at spreading it equitably or building the society needed to support it. And yet, for all this talk of a nation bursting at the seams, there is another Ireland. An Ireland where the feeling of emptiness has never really gone away. To understand it, you have to leave the choked, traffic-filled streets of Dublin and drive west. Here, the narrative of fullness and pressure simply melts away into the landscape. This is the Ireland of postcards, of films, of the global imagination. a cinematic tapestry of rolling green hills, dramatic, sea-battered cliffs, and wild, windswept coasts. It's the stark, beautiful, moon-like landscape of the Bann in County Clare, the rugged, bog-filled wilderness of Connemara, and the towering, majestic Slieve League cliffs in Donegal. It is a landscape that feels ancient, raw, and deeply, profoundly melancholic. Because while the country as a whole is growing, that growth is overwhelmingly concentrated on the east coast, in a corridor centered around the capital. A huge demographic and economic divide has opened up between the booming Dublin metropolitan area and the rest of the country. As the capital has expanded and swelled, many parts of rural and Western Ireland are still experiencing the familiar pain of depopulation. Young people continue to leave the small towns and villages of Mayo, Donegal, and Kerry for college or better job opportunities in the cities, or in a strange and bitter echo of the past, they leave the country altogether. Even with record immigration into Ireland, Irish citizens themselves are still leaving. In the year to April 2024, nearly 35,000 Irish people emigrated, many driven away by the very same cost of living and housing crises that plague the cities, seeking a better quality of life in Australia, Canada, or the UK. This constant outflow leaves many rural communities struggling to survive. Local shops close their doors, family-run pubs shut down for good, and schools watch their enrollment numbers fall year after year. And while the absolute number of people living in rural areas has grown slightly in recent years, the percentage of the national population living rurally has plummeted from over 55% in 1960 to around 35% today. This emptiness is economic too. The wealth of the Celtic Tiger never really reached many of these areas in a meaningful way. The high-paying multinational jobs are overwhelmingly concentrated in the cities of Dublin, Cork, and Galway. Outside of the core industries of farming and tourism, good, stable, well-paying jobs can be incredibly hard to find. It is another of Ireland's great contradictions, a country whose global image is almost entirely defined by its rural beauty, but whose economic future is becoming entirely urban. Scattered across this landscape, you can even find modern ruins sitting alongside the ancient ones, the infamous ghost estates. These are entire housing developments that were started during the frenetic Celtic Tiger boom and simply abandoned, half-finished, when the 2008 crash hit. While many have since been completed or torn down, dozens still linger, haunting reminders of a boom that, in some places, only left a new and different kind of emptiness behind. So, what is the real Ireland? Is it the empty, windswept landscape, a place haunted by the ever-present ghosts of a lost population? Or is it the full, vibrant, and profoundly stressed-out city, humming with new energy and new voices from every corner of the globe? The truth is, Ireland is both. It is a country living in a state of permanent, unresolved contradiction, a place where history isn't something that lies dormant in the past, it is an active, dynamic force in the present. It is a nation built on a bedrock of profound loss, a place so deeply shaped by demographic collapse that the memory of it is inescapable in the landscape and the national psyche. That history explains the deep, almost primal sense of pride and vindication in seeing the country finally grow again. But that very success has created its own set of debilitating challenges. The globalized, low-tax economic model that powered the recovery has also fueled deep inequality, a severe housing crisis, and a cost of living that makes a stable, secure life a desperate struggle for many of its own citizens. The story of modern Ireland is one of remarkable survival and resilience, but it is also a cautionary tale about the immense costs of unbalanced growth. The country is caught between two powerful, opposing forces. It is being pulled relentlessly forward by globalization and immigration, which have made it more diverse, more dynamic, and more modern than ever before. At the same time, it is being held back by its own strained infrastructure, its political inertia, and the long, dark shadow of its past. The emptiness of the landscape coexists with the fullness of the cities. The spectacular economic boom coexists with a crippling quality of life crisis. Ireland is a land of ghosts and gateways, ghosts of the millions who left or were lost, whose absence shaped the nation's soul for a century and a half, and a gateway for the hundreds of thousands who have arrived more recently, bringing new life and new energy, but also new and unforeseen pressures. It is a country forever defined by its tragic past, but one that stubbornly refuses to be imprisoned by it. And in this constant, unresolved tension, between empty and full, past and future, loss and return, lies the complex, contradictory and utterly captivating story of modern Ireland.